server. I'm just going to simply put in the name of my server. It doesn't have to match exactly, but tell you what, it's a lot easier if you can match these up with what the actual name of the server is. We're not going to use chap. All we need is the initiator node name, which I will show you how to get right now. All right, I have just basically switched the view into a remote desktop session on our protected virtual center server, and I have the VI client open, the vSphere client open. I have a single cluster and I have a single ESX server, and what I'm trying to do is get the iSCSI name or the IQN name so I can put that back in to the left-hand management side to be recognized. So to do that, we go to ESX server, configuration tab, down to storage adapters. We want to then select the iSCSI software adapter. And right here you can see the iSCSI name. An easy way to grab those to go to properties and configure. Where it's already highlighted, I can just copy that. Once that's copied, I can roll back to the left-hand management console, paste that in there, and then go ahead and click OK. That will add the server into the console. But we're not done yet. That server needs to be assigned some volumes. To do that, I click on Tasks and Assign. I'm going to go ahead and click the box for VMFS because I would like that to be presented to that host. And I will also present the non-replicated volume VMFS2 as well. I'll go ahead and click OK. Those have been presented. Now it's a matter of going back into that ESX host, doing a rescan of the iSCSI software adapter. As you can see, I have 2 volumes now, and if you're a pro at vSphere, you'll know that we can now format those with BMFS and finish the configuration of this protected site and get some VMs on that. We'll do that, and we'll join you back in just a little bit. SRM also has some VMware software requirements that we need to be aware of in order to have a successful installation. vCenter Server and ESX Server versions must be compatible with the version of SRM that we are installing. In order to be for certain that you have a good combination, make sure to take a look at the SRM compatibility matrices on VMware.com. And there's a PDF, just like where we went to look at the supported storage solutions. There's also a PDF that'll show you how you can match up the specific version of ESX with vCenter, with SRM, and it also talks about the different operating systems that are in use. This course is using ESXi 4.0 Update 1, and for vCenter we're using vCenter 4.0, and it's running on a Windows Server 2003 R2 32-bit. And it is a supported version. It's worked pretty well for me in the past. There are others, and you can look at that matrix to find out more. Also, in order to proceed with the installation, you'll also need to download the SRM server software and have that ready to go. You'll also want to download the storage replication adapter from VMware. So that's the SRA. That's the piece that will talk from SRM. It'll allow SRM to talk to the supported storage replication, in this case, HP Left-Hand's VSA. We'll also need the SRM vSphere client plugin to be installed. That's not a separate download. That's actually included with the SRM server software, so we don't have to worry about having that in place. We'll also need to make sure that we have a vSphere installation in 2 sites. Through this lesson, you've seen that we have a protected and a recovery site. We have those in place, ready to go, so the installation shouldn't be a problem. In addition to the VMware software requirements, there's also some database requirements that you need to be aware of. SRM requires a supported database server in order to store its configuration and their storage recovery plans and whatnot. Various versions of SQL Server, Oracle, and IBM's DB2 are all supported. For the purpose of this lab, we're going to recommend that you use SQL Server 2005 Express Edition. Why? Well, it's free and it's fairly easy to download and set up. So for the purpose of your lab and following along with this lesson, it's a good way to go. Part of meeting these requirements will be taken care of in the 3 following bullet points. We're going to create a database instance for SRM. We're also going to create a database user with the correct privileges, and we're going to create a DSN for the SRM database on the SRM server. And we're going to do that on both SRM servers. In this case, the SRM server will live on the same server as the vCenter server, so we'll have to be a little bit careful, especially as we let those databases commingle. Actually, not commingle, but they'll be on the same server. With that, let's dive in to the demo of the database setup for SRM. Okay, we're now ready to show you how to set up a SQL Server database for use with VMware SRM. In the case of this lesson, we're going to use the built-in SQL Server that's included with VMware vCenter. And one thing you'll need to add to your list of software to get is actually this tool that we're using right now, which is called Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio Express. It's a free download from Microsoft.com. Just Google on it or Bing for it, and you'll find it. It's a fairly easy and straightforward installation. Next, and you get here. Once you are here, what we'll need to do is create a database instance. We'll then create a database user with the correct privileges to log in and create tables and configure the database for SRM. And then we will create a DSN that will allow the application to connect into the SQL Server. To get started, we're going to go ahead and go to Databases. And a couple options here. I'm just going to right-click on the database level and say New Database. This brings up the database wizard. I'm going to use the name SRM1DB for the name of our database. And I don't have a user created yet, so we'll go back in later and create the owner for this database. So the default options are fine for now. Click through options and file groups. There's nothing that we need to worry about there. So go ahead and click OK to have the database created. Great. We have a database. Next thing we need to do is create a user. And a couple levels here. You need a database user and a SQL Server user. I'm going to create the SQL Server user first. And to do that, you go to the security level, then choose logons. Once in logons, you can right-click here in the white space and choose new logon from that pop-up menu. I'm going to change my authentication here to SQL Server authentication, and keeping it very simple throughout this. This could be anything you need though. I'm going to use SRM1DB as the name of my logon, and I'll give it a username and password. Don't want that to expire since this is a service account. Here at the bottom, the default database location, I will change that, however, to SRMDB. That does it here for the General tab. I'm going to go ahead and look at the server roles next. I'm going to take some liberties here since this is my own lab and I don't have high security needs. I'm not the NSA. I'm not a financial institution. I'm going to go ahead and click sysadmin for my server role. This will make this a lot easier when I'm configuring SRM later. However, in your environment, if you have higher security needs, I suggest that you refer back to the documentation from VMware to have just enough security supplied to that account. And you can work with your SQL Server or your database administration team to figure out what you would need in your environment. If you happen to be the DBA for your organization on top of the network guy, the server guy, and the VMware guy, then I highly recommend that you go to TrainSignal's website and take a look at their options for SQL training. There's some good options there, and it'll give you what you need to know to get granular with the configuration of the security. With that being said, I'll go ahead and choose sysadmin for the server role. And under the user mapping, I'm going to assign this user to the SRM1 database. I'm also going to give him the DB owner database role membership. And that's it. That's all we need to do. Logon's enabled by default, and he's permitted to connect into the database. I'll go ahead and click OK. In this instance, though, that we're talking about, we're configuring this database on the exact same server that SRM is going to be installed on. If you're configuring this for a SRM server that's going to connect from a different operating system, a different remote server, you'll need to make sure that this database is configured to allow that connection. To do so, just go ahead and click on Properties at the top level of the database. And you'll want to come down to Security. Before you go anywhere, make sure that SQL Server and Windows Authentication Mode is selected. Then we'll go to Connections. And you'll want to make sure that Allow Remote Connections is checked. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to connect from a remote server. This all looks good. I'll click OK. And now that we've got the database created, we've got the SQL Server logon created, I want to make sure that the database user is also set up correctly. To do that, click on the database level and go to Security and Users. And it looks like through my creation of the SQL Server logon that I already have a database user. His default schema is DBO, and we should be good to go. He's a DB owner for database role. Go ahead and click OK. We're now ready to begin the installation, but there's one thing that we're missing right now, and that is a DSN. To create that, we'll go to Start and Administrative Tools and Data Sources. This is where we create the ODBC information necessary for SRM to connect in and contact the database, whether it's remote or whether it's local. There's already a DSN here for the Virtual Center service. We're going to create a different one to allow SRM to talk to its database. And to do that, we'll click on Add and choose a SQL Native Client, since this is a 2005 and above. Now you can give it any name that makes sense. I'm going to keep consistent and go to the drop down so I can make sure I can select from a pre-configured or a sensed database on the network. I know that this is the instance I'm looking for if I'm installing directly on the server. If you're looking for a database instance on a remote server, you'd want to make sure that you select the correct SQL Server instance. So I'll go ahead and click Next once I've selected that. I'm not using integrated Windows login. I am going to use SQL Server authentication. And I'll put in the SQL Server logon information that we used earlier. On this next screen, you'll make sure that the default database gets changed to SRM1DB. Then click Next. And finish. That's all there is to creating a DSN. We'll go ahead and test that to make sure it worked. Test completed successfully. Great. That's all you need to do in order to create a database user, and SQL Server logon, and to create the ODBC information necessary for SRM to connect into its database during the installation. An SRM installation also has some server and network requirements that we need to make sure we take care of. For SRM server requirements, they're quite similar to vCenter Server. So in the case of a small environment, we actually anticipate that sharing the server with vCenter Server is a good idea and works just fine for 5 hosts or less. We're looking at around 3 to 4 gig of memory in that case and 2 virtual CPUs, although I've run it effectively with a single virtual CPU. Larger environments should definitely consider using a dedicated VM for both vCenter Server and the SRM server. You'll also need some network ports opened up between the various components of SRM. In between the SRM server and the vCenter server, within one site, you'll want to make sure that you have port 8095 open for SOAP communication between those two. The vCenter server plugin download also needs to be available, and there's a port for that which is 8096. That's just HTTP traffic going over that. Allows you to download the plugin to install within your vSphere client. Communication between API clients within SRM also uses a port 9007. That's the SOAP protocol talking over it. Another thing to have ready and documented and thought out is the IP networking scheme that you're going to use at the recovery site. Some folks use DHCP and they'll use leases to assign IP addresses to VMs. Some might use a pool of IP addresses that are completely separate from the IP addresses that are statically set at the protected site. And other sites will actually use what's called a stretched VLAN, which even though the recovery site is in a remote location, it uses the exact same networking scheme as the protected site, making it quite easy from an SRM perspective. However, the complexity is actually pushed out to load balancers and firewalls and some of the issues that you might see with a stretched VLAN. DNS server is also a very key piece to have figured out for your SRM installation, because many people have a DNS server for their protected site, but the recovery site, they might think they can just use that DNS server from the protected site. Well, this is a DR product, so we want to plan for the worst, right? So it's a good idea to actually have an Active Directory / DNS server replicated to the recovery site. That way, in the event of a disaster, DNS and Active Directory are always up and running, ready to go. That's about the end of the lesson. There's some key terms, though, that we should review before we wrap up. Site Recovery Adapter is one of those key terms that was introduced in this lesson. This is also known as the SRA. This is a software provided to VMware by their storage partners to help SRM talk to the underlying storage replication software. What have we learned in today's lesson? Well, we've learned that SRM requires supported storage replication. Without it, there is no SRM functionality. We also learned that VMware vSphere requirements must be met in order to have SRM work properly. SRM works on top of 2 distinct VMware vSphere installations with ESX servers and storage replication underneath that. That's your solid foundation. You also need to make sure that there's a database that's dedicated to each SRM server at the protected site and the recovery site. Otherwise, you won't be able to install the SRM software effectively. We also overviewed the server network requirements that you need to think out and plan prior to doing the installation. Well, that's all for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.